Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we are looking at something kind of heavy, but also pretty fascinating, right? It's unexpected celebrity deaths.
Yeah, it's always interesting how these people you don't know can affect you so much, when they pass.
Yeah, it's true. And for this deep dive, our source is this top 10 deaths you didn't see coming list.
Yeah.
It's from the Top 10's website, which is all user generated. And it's cool. We get a window into what shocked everybody. And the comments, those are great too. They add a whole other layer.
Yeah. Those comments can be really revealing, I think. They show us how we view fame and how we deal with mortality. And what we think we know about these figures, public figures.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's jump in. One thing that kind of jumps out at me is how many different ways we define unexpected. Sometimes it's about age. Remember when Michael Jackson died? Like, where were you?
It was like the world stopped for a second.
He was only 50. Like, it felt impossible for a lot of us. This is the king of pop. It's like he was frozen in time by his music and his image. And, it kind of forced everybody to face the fact that even icons are mortal.
Yeah, that contrast between his youthful image and, the reality of him dying, I think that's a key part of why it was so shocking. It's like we had built him up as almost superhuman.
Right. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum. Chuck Berry's on the list too.
Yeah.
But the comments on him are more like, well, he lived a long life.
Yeah, it shows how long we think someone should live plays into this whole idea of unexpected. With someone like Chuck Berry, who had such a long career and was so influential, I think there was this feeling like he had already lived a full life.
It makes you think about how we, measure a life, doesn't it?
Totally. And how we build these narratives around these figures as a society. Speaking of narratives, this list brings up the 27 Club.
Oh, yeah. The musicians who die at 27, often from drugs. Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain. It's kind of eerie.
It's a phenomenon, right? It's become cultural. Why 27? Is there something about that age for musicians? Or is it just a coincidence that, is blown out of proportion because it's a little creepy?
I think it's probably a little of both, to be honest.
Okay.
Statistically, I don't know if there is a proven spike in deaths at 27 for musicians, but the cultural impact, that is huge. And it feeds into that live fast, die young myth.
Yeah.
The image of the tortured artist, which when you think about it, is pretty messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. It glamorizes risky behavior and downplays the struggles that these artists actually went through.
And then when a musician does die at that age, it reinforces that narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. It raises questions about the pressures of fame and, substances and how we as a society contribute to these narratives, even if we don't mean to.
Yeah. Shifting gears a bit, some deaths are shocking because of the circumstances, like it was so sudden. Accidents, violence, like Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter.
Oh, yeah. His death from a stingray bar when he was filming was jarring for sure. You'd think with all his experience.
It shows how our perception of someone can make their death feel more unexpected. Irwin had this aura of invincibility, this confidence with animals. It made it seem like nothing could hurt him.
It really challenged what we thought we knew about him and what he could handle.
Then you have these cases where the unexpectedness is even more because of the violence. It shatters any sense of safety. Like Dimebag Darrell. He was the guitarist for Pantera. He was shot on stage by a fan.
It makes you realize that even in what seem like controlled environments, tragedy can still happen. It forces us to think about how unpredictable life is. And in this case, the dangers of fame and the dark side of fandom.
It's a lot to process, for sure. Before we move on, what are your initial thoughts on what we've talked about so far?
Well, I think what's interesting is how these unexpected deaths often expose the difference between how we view a celebrity and their real human life. We build them up, we create these narratives. And then when they die, especially if it's sudden or tragic, it makes us face the illusion we've created.
It's true. It's a reminder that even the people who seem larger than life are still fragile.
It's kind of interesting, how sometimes a celebrity's death is sad, but it doesn't really feel shocking.
Yeah, that's true. Like Patrick Swayze is a good example. He's on this list. But when he died, he'd have been fighting pancreatic cancer very publicly.
Yeah, it was almost like everyone was kind of bracing themselves, like a shared grief.
Right. It makes you think, does knowing the circumstances beforehand, even if you don't know when it's going to happen, does it change how we deal with the loss?
It's an interesting question. Maybe it gives us time to kind of accept it, even though you're still sad when it happens.
Then you have those cases where it's just random, and that's why it's so shocking. Princess Diana, that car crash.
Yeah.
A global icon just gone like that. And it shook the world because it showed how even the people who seem untouchable, the ones who seem like they're living in these protected bubbles, it showed that they aren't immune to fate.
It shattered that illusion of immortality that we project onto celebrities sometimes. We see them on screen and they seem larger than life, and we forget that they're just as vulnerable as us.
And it's that shared vulnerability, that reminder that we're all human. I think that's why those losses affect us so much. I don't know about you, but for me, with some celebrities, especially the ones whose struggles were very public, I'd catch myself thinking, something doesn't feel right. And you see that a lot in the comments too, that sense of foreboding, even if they couldn't have known what was going to happen.
It's hindsight bias, I think. After something happens, it's easy to look back and connect things that weren't so obvious at the time.
Like Freddie Mercury. People knew about his lifestyle, the rumors about his health. But when he died from AIDS, it was still a huge loss.
It's also about our own experiences, how they shape how we see risk. If you've known someone who's struggled with addiction or a serious illness, you're more likely to see the signs in other people, even celebrities.
It's funny because this list also got me thinking about how the stories we tell about certain people can change how we view their deaths. One comment said, Jim Morrison's death wasn't that unexpected because he was a charter member of the 27 Club.
Oh, yeah. The myth of the 27 Club kind of creates an expectation, doesn't it? Like if you live a certain way, it's inevitable.
It's like we've made up these stories, and then when they die, it feels like the story's ending, instead of it being a shock. It's kind of unsettling when you think about it.
It is, because we have to remember these are people, not just characters in a story.
Okay, here's one that I thought was interesting. George Michael. His death was sad, but it wasn't really a shock. But the top comment is all about how good his music was. I wonder if that's a way of coping, focusing on the good stuff.
I think it is, celebrating what someone brought to the world, even when you're sad. It's a very human thing to do.
Yeah, it reminds us that even though they're gone, they still have an impact. Their work lives on.
Exactly. It's a kind of immortality, I guess.
So this list has some names on it that some people might not recognize. And that's interesting too, like Hiromi Suru.
Oh, yeah. She was a huge voice actress in Japan, really respected, known for her work in anime. And her passing was devastating to fans of that world, but it didn't have the same global impact as some of the other people on the list.
Which shows that these ideas of what's unexpected are totally influenced by our own backgrounds, right? What's shocking to one person might not even register with someone else.
Absolutely. This list is from one specific group of people, probably people who visit the Top 10's website.
Oh.
It's good to remember that everyone sees things differently.
All right, one more before we get to our final thoughts.
Yimbo?
Kimbo Slice.
Ah, yes. He was a mixed martial artist and, an online personality. He died from heart failure pretty recently. He wasn't exactly a household name in the traditional sense, but he had a huge following.
Yeah, he was larger than life. And I think that's part of why it was so shocking to the people who knew his work when he died. It shows how what it means to be a celebrity is always changing online.
And that no matter how famous someone is, their death can have a huge impact on the people who connected with them, whether they knew them personally or through their work.
We've covered a lot. As we've gone through this list, what stood out to you the most?
Well, I keep coming back to this idea of illusion versus reality. We build up these images of celebrities, right? Often based on not that much information. And then when they die, especially if it's unexpected, it makes us face the difference between what we thought and, the complexity of their actual lives. It's humbling, I guess. It reminds you that you never really know the whole story.
Wow, it's crazy how much there is to think about.
Right.
From just a simple top 10 list.
Yeah, it really shows, how much these people mean to us, even if it's just through their work. And when they die, it makes us think about not just, their death, but our own.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple more before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee and David Bowie, both super influential, but their deaths felt really different, in terms of how unexpected they were.
Yeah. I mean, Bruce Lee was only 32 when he died, and it was from cerebral edema. And at the time, it was so mysterious. It seemed like it came out of nowhere, especially because he was, the picture of health.
Right, and all the rumors and speculation, I think that made it even more shocking. With Bowie, though, it was still sad, when he died from cancer. But there was this, I don't know, like a sense of peace about it.
Yeah, and his last album, Black Star, it came out just a couple days before he died. And it was all about, death and saying goodbye. It was almost like he was getting his fans ready for it.
Yeah, it felt like he wanted us to grieve with him and celebrate his life, while also being okay with it ending. Which makes me think about what we talked about before. Does knowing what's going to happen, does that change how you feel about it?
It feels like in Bowie's case, he was the one telling the story. He was using his art to help us understand, you know.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff here.
Yeah.
What do you think are the big takeaways from this deep dive, into unexpected celebrity deaths?
I think it shows how complicated our relationship with fame is. We tell ourselves these stories about celebrities, We put our own hopes and fears onto them. And then when they die, especially when we don't expect it, it forces us to deal with those stories and those assumptions we made about who they were and, how their life should have gone.
Yeah. It reminds us that celebrities are people, just like us, facing the same things, the same fragility.
Exactly. And death, it doesn't matter how famous or rich you are. It's something we all experience. And it makes us realize, how precious life is and to make the most of the time we have.
Well said. I think that's a great place to end. But before we go, here's a last thought for, everyone listening. Does knowing everything about a celebrity's death, the struggles, the choices they made, what happened, does that change how you feel about it? Or is it still a shock?
Yeah, something to think about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. See you next time.